Hello to my wonderful listeners. One Family TV wala mutanale nan kotenke. Mbadi ngolu janin kanin audio natale me yalo ko wala be sunding mansa sumare la anin karfa sise la kuma kawndi na denal hakilo bakang yatande ko karfa sise atele modi me yalo ko asawunta MPP de bar karfa fona ta diam ka tande ko ate mansa MPP de mbe audio natale me yalo ko anin mansa sumare la diamo ninde janin ko natale nan kibaro na da kibar kando me yalo ko na bondi nan damento wala mu kere fatude yatande ko UDP ko la barma do be jede me yalo ko ika ko Ramzia Diab atele moti me yalon ko abota UDP de asawunta MPP de ya tande ko kibaro ni kabiri mo ko li ikafa me ko Sidi Cissé atande la ko tonyala mo moni musino ikafa me ko Ramzia Diab atele moti me yalon ko ani president Adama Barrow nata diamu de atande ko abota UDP asawunta MPP pour ani mansa kunda se do ko keno nyame na me yalon ko wala mo Ramzia de ya tande ko ni musino mo molati me yalon ko mo barama balamati UDP kono de atele moti me yalon ko katandi ko abota UDP le de sar am molati asawunda MPP kono de ikafa ko Ramzia Diab kere fatu ya safe katandi ko ye mo kumandi me yalon ko wolen Sidi Cissé di aynen kumanin kuma konin ta katandi la ko katonyande ko to nyalamo ni mo molati me yalon ko asawunda MPP kono de mbadi ngol de woro mbadi wol bedin audio natala na me yalon ko ni lamo yani hakilola mbadi wol kan e lamo anin jusola audio me yalon ko mbe natala na mbadi ngol de
ndele tonya de nde kunun nana man kam fe kam bar kunun kam fade because mun keda ndeni lete mo be nyam bo ni école téléphone sika image bi fa fenke wala fa fonye karim fon wala fa konye ko akonye yaji ate janna be fe gafi nyanta na ite yala fulu fa ni dia mane kacha ali nyu so akilo la fa so that he can know what to say you know this is nothing. But ni te ko mo social media de ko be nyim mo be jable do sambi ko mo be wala sambi be problème mo sotla ya wala sanaba aman jerala ka ko mo be jable ka ko mo bondi mo lale jos ibele time mo tala nin ku yamal ko fana ku da ko pan ite be time mo tala isale be ko mo ni ba jable nyaade wala ni ma intra jable fana yekku jutu ko mo ni na kana hana jabi fa ya wala san but make sure know yourself and what's happened ya je ko ndanga an ko ite mo forolti ku dol be kelbi ni yaji bi ni bebe kelabi ko mi ko keta nyame no banyo raman ko nyama kay ndanga ne tan nan ko mo fo ite ka dajo tupi yemura kan ko take because nene maji karafa ko mo fonte ay ke faniyat wala nanga jiko sodeto adu wala na fana ngani yo fana sodede fana wala binni sida nyen ko nyaka jam ko sa nanga no problem bal lafta ko ko nim bakala ke suti no kroti ndamman ni demman komin kol kenyalam don bar hani nyinga ke fenga du kuma nanje wato men kana jeto ndefo man lafi wala num fam yalla ngo fo na birin jol ngo ndefo man la lafantol damman ngi kinke sudo ning fonko kono pour to kana tinya yawna salaba eme ke buli bayni ngi mol fana komin hormone bu nyala beni tema yela bunya fo sika kuka yita ya sayndi makuga kayra kono no problem mote nenna mote sonkanda ngo en tamu UDP dingwati ndaba UDP sangi joli bare mbirimbe bola je wato mana ni mbidema UDP ngabo kantene ni ibuka kuma fonye because nga hormone sambe ka ngabunya sambe ka buke neni muka kuma kujaw foyma nenata UDP do yala nenata UDP ngala na UDP la yal fa do yala ngo be fo yenne very good so this is nothing nafatala foroma nyana sunna wala fo formante ya foroma nyana sunna formante ya kama muta kula de ntime muta kula de also man danyala muso kula fa nka ko ta fa man kam fade ma muta kula de ngalon ko forola mati dan ñu bete kala fam dan ko modol folbe je ko dan mo ba fa ko bari aje to nya kara fayda sogolde imagine modol bi je kenen social media to molbu ke jabi fo ka ba to nya kare kun suro bakele imagine molbu diam la bukan mo jabi fam bara kun suro bakele fayda ko mi ke kay fangi ni molle te be menkele yo ke banta finish nta man kam fay kam de because ngalon ko amanke yenna jiko tinyade bari komi ku kilin do na mun dela promote do ne nga ko do so bi ndema because ngan ko ndenga ne man jikotinya jikitinya ino man kata nyola frangi man jiki o jikitinya tinyaro kede damen do wala mun tel lamulti do nyim nonsense mon mi yalon ko ne kayto mu tete ya muta ya sen that's nonsense. I don't want that. Very good. So okay ndamon kam fa man tan fe mude kamma ala ya long billahi man kay do ni sen masen wato kala muta wallahi alka nyata kidala malo wallahi billahi masen wato kala muta wana biden ko don ko nga hajban ko kolle nga du fanan kolle bari be ko masen bari yara fo abe nyi nafan ko men ko mo balo men ko la sen molde because ndata ko fa nyaadi le imagine ni silvo son ko be interview wato mena ngamo silvo ka fo modu ko nga fo ne kabrin kunu be nyim fon ko science na taring ini silvo la interview ni man silvo mo ya bo foka alabi amo labonda ngamo silvo ka fo mo sabale nga fo ne ko kabrin kunu e be nyi letoro science na taring yaji o jelo nadalan ko yo to nyaan biko leta nyi atale asafe aya sen nantela mo balo kono no imam ko kini on sanje imaje brimbe sin tabulo kono de imaje meyen ko na mayen telephone de fo na diamuta telephone mo sabal diamuta le no bringa leta nyi rid wato menna yalo hajbani ko kafe ko leta woni na safe nyam correct okay namo fona diamuta no nga bari karba bari fana yalo ndene ko mi jela mu ban non ndene na man kete di ndene modo te ni sifal kachala ndel tay to tambe ni ko siban ko ndeka nyim banku ko njande bu kam bolu politiko la nte ni politicien dol maga kin ndem kam bolu politiko la ite yalo ne nte kam balun tarole ti an ka hosulo men ke jang nte kato na kapare na kule la men na balu men na ko nte man time hosulo nyim politiki nonsense diamu ni ko nte man to time so wala ko mi telam den do ngabala fala so de biri wolo ni diamu do ngoy ko la ko mbala fale I'm sorry fanan and I feel that ko definitely karfa nyata la enjoy kanne definitely ndimo nyi ngani dem man so bari ko mi ko nyi ku sivas na la man tema te wala nyi diamu sivalte definitely do man ke ngani yoti definitely manyi emde tonya manyi ngani ni tema comme ngani yo to rela ko wala ni yo to na ko o manke ngani yoti definitely yes so bari ala mel no wasala do sanke ala betata okay ndala man problem so do molde ndema ngani jewa so do molde ndema ngani jewa so do molde ndel kay ngalan ko ndel la moli fongani problem bota wolle fulo bala wolle fulo le taw ni sen nga ngila ndenge understand ban ndema ngani jewa so do molde man problem so do mola adu memuta kula fanan adu ngalon ko niyaje be nyimbe fenkete ko mi hormo men ni bunya be ni nyimbol tema wala man be jadi ko kabin tuk yo kan kala yani adu defo ngi sopodo kanne so ndema problem so do wala yes but no problem abe tiata ala mel non do wasa do ndeka ni ndeka ko do so do nte nyin nanyin do nte ba ndam ite you know that bibi ni ko do bente bul fulfula de nyimbo le fam ba mbeta mekki wala ko do sa ni lam ko bi fenata mo adu man la fi malola do nun tan nyin ko do mbeta mba sen dama ba fala na di niwlam no problem hay I don't care ngolo ne wala nan ko so ma jane wala do te man de alon ko jane o te ma te keno jane o te ma do te na o fa ti ase keno kana wori ni ngoro nyo mo le mi ma kita je o po so kula ase keno o rekala o te kala problem de ni ko do so science hanyu so do fon sama so man da be do be so na bi mbatam ba ko do senda yeah billahi wala tallahi was mon na fi malola din ko mi mol kane mari je nyamen asatari te ma wuli o kama iti ya wuli men kama satara man ko different bari ko mi mol ka tan yani social media jamulu e be ko li jogi la nyamen hay den tan nare ha nyim gisi nan nyim bekela ya si va man ko rek ha aduna satara te ma wuli o kama min fo ka memba la foro ya man da mo nyaado memba man foro ya ka tabi mola memba man la ke ya to aka dal wala na yeme ko don nya ka si dal kana response ya mo bel bi je nak nte bu ko jabinte nte hani mo si suba nyim bani la
sendi ba de bari ngani ne kala bala ko nda o ko wada ngaji amol de wol audio de ko le bana kay auto sa audio na tan do wala be se do da o na ya
nte hani mosi subante bani le social media kono ite ka mo kan te tumi le ko mo fo ma social media bay ne ka mo ko man sa mo respond kan
no
nte mo ka mo respond social media ma time of so do fang because ngano ka mo tinyale bari kabin juna nye ko len ko ngadia mun tani te na diamo ke ngana hada ma diamo ke jabir ko nim fongon ko be ten kundije nte be mem fola nte ngofo bang jabir ko ni non sen school wol ten kundije folo ko ni ko be mol be jabir le time wes la ngani ne foy ya ona sana adu ntenge understand fana biye nyim problem of fenkete don ntenga lon ko koku be kering amanke sawoti because nyim problem nyim abudante le karola bi ya fu don ntenga ko ntele ko tinyaro kan ntele ya because kawo mem fota ntele ngatinya ntele site nyina bota jele because ntenga ko temal le tanyi sama social media ntele mol wol fon le asamba okay so ntengo understand wonyama so wote itina da fan defend ke ntemo muta kula woto so wala ken ni kabrin kunu ndengela nyinni na audio mol ba fa ha bari fa ko non ntemo ka wufundi social media kam ko modol jabi ntemo time fon so do fon ntemo karafala ko kam pour na nyo so pour na diamuno den nun se nyin ko tamano ameke bulle problem to sodlanu moto sikalato do moto sikalante to ako be sta smoothly no problem mo be sa understand what happened and muna fona mutonyaka kodi very good so but ni call imbeke sodno ni ko be diamu lamba ka diamu no para okay ni kay abandal don ko ni ko ak bandal don ni manke fe ofenti ndeke mamu da fe ofenti nak ngo nde mamu da fe ofenti memu da kula nde I know ndede memu da ko kula adu man sika so de bana fanan man kam fay kama man sonde me fula sutay kama fanan ela muzo kabin kunun fa ben kolon kan nay odio jamal fa seni nyana na fa kan kol bari ngano ko nyani o torale bari ngayta ndan ko kay ko ndiyani yani makar fa kol kan nadi niwna mati malla fi ala ni tora kola ndana nyin ay nyin ko kel non ko suturo kolom because ngal no ko suturo kolom jo bari nin ko nyinam na way fenke o nyama don fo mo le nyin ko fenke do ya be promotion da ko to karfa mo froda ka malle ngai froda mata ka malle do mal telephone adun to nyal nin telephone mo malle fana yaje ni mo le ko mo fo ko nyin manke damete ne mo le fenke ko nyin funni social media one time do aka hana ma do malle ngai ko mantra sawo ngai ko bari dia moy bang sama nana da fay ko ay na telephone sika ban ngadi dia moy bang na dia mo yawna sana ko dia mo dam mangol ka bang ni mo politiko dam manati yajile so ni manke fenti ni mo manke fenti bari ko dol beje ani kuma kan dol beje akana woli jabi kata social media ka kumu bonde hada madi wala le na fatala no nyame santi nintenga kuma fatenga atete lonna because imaja atabukete kola kandele kon ko matele miro fe ko ntadati yale ntada nga ferota nga dabal pour nsi fe onso do nyaadi le ngata ngatala comme hannata moji bari mol bol folate anu namme da fon baje ko do ni mo tonya ani yalla ni comme de malla comme madiam ko la fon bay comme nata wonde ne la tam bodo ndeso to senadino non ti dia modol be jente tol jabilan to debbu kala fi west time ko la ni la folo so senadino to na tam mo sen la jele ngi senadino set ay senia so ke no o dum ala sata bo ala sata na me fo fana wala bari yalla say ni nyi ko ni fana mboto ko la ngola foy ha ba nyi ko say ko do nyi ngamuro na ko silan ko do nyi emuro silan ndiyanta mu na folaye wala ndaka men foye ndaka men foye nata nun ko kunu na darnu bi nata nun jaha ya bin so man nande be ko ga ninge so no ñin kum fongata den no ñin diamo ni fonko be social media ñin ta jare la ñin bela ibina jenne na call ngaitan la komi ko tonya de ñinde nga même fo ko ñin kata ñamen abota en téléphone la carola la because nga même fo wala mu ñinti ko ñin bita lettre ñi submit for na submit bar men na ke problème moti ñil na lettre ñi samba social media junale atata man fenke bar say même bije adun hormone bani ñir frante ma because kuma ka men kankala kala place ñi yaji amalla fo fenke bar problème ñi kata dame bri afonte so manda don tana talon ka fo ko iko mot sabali wala lettre ñi sen yawna san adunga man fo nyama foto nyame wala minti ko karfa bida be letro ni sommi na fo so dron karfa bida be letro ni sommi na fo karfa mun mbodu son karfa bida be letro ni sommi na fo na sommi
ako tuto la njambara kay ko yo go kay ko dina mo finda bar fana dela mo finda bi important da ba kay ko
okay
ya lam njambane ko ati wo kabo ko
imagine so wala ko betinya yajel
wala ati wo kabo wala be spelling
wala ko tinya yajel yo yaje somanda bride en dekol yo okay iko module aseni imaje wala ne ning sivo balela sonko no ndenga understand ifele go karava ndela di wala muy long time ite yawla ne mara bang sorry wala nan tebe call kan pour nga diamu no denu nga kaccianu denu ni membe kete nyi ndore te kela yawna sana bi ko te entelo ne ko ndede de tinyala te wolonne adu mo badon kama iben solo nga diamu folo ite yalla nga niyo membe la ite la ko ite yalla yolonne adu ndene ne de tinyala yolonne okay ngangan ye kendo la sote nsodron ngangan ye kendo la sote nte mo si falati nkabata mo la ko to bakelente yawna sanda ba okay wala nani social media diamu ko ni fanko ndebe kala fi ngam fankal hanni ngam moy maji fam mboke respond nte mo si fa because I don't have time it okay very good den nun niata bri so manda be ko kanu niata ni mo balo tano ndebe advisement dile no nyin ko to fudala nyin beto no fam because ndenga no ko nyin nati nyanyi lama don ko nyin nati nyanyi abu ndel la karola because ntel lamol le fon le lettre ni sen asata ite may lettre do mo submit follow ni ne kata problème moti yo bari o be de da no ni den ni beta sot na no problème ni kono no bari so manda bi de ben de ko ko ngale taro nyedo ndeme ilo kuma kawni den ndem la no wala no fang ndega mi ko mi ko ben ne kan no fang yaji so ka fa mo le follow ya seni ndem la no wala no because ndem maji social media maji dawda yaji kalafa ha bar mo bar ngam telephone de fanam de telephone be kun farla nyolal de monan ko e be nyin call fo be sigala monan kar fan do ko do ko de fanam ba bar mbe men fo do ko de fanam bulo ko bang bar sa ni sono be bulo ko monan de be nyin call be sigano la bin suba bi te be de ko la mo balo be de da sigala akada line akada bisirine ngora fo ndaba ko de gaddu do mbolande ko ra ko do dem dan mbolande fa ko ko do kere ko no be lori nyoka wanyale ari al bakari fo mun nata bare jawa wala fa ko be nyaka se ko sol bedere bimbe kere akoy nyaka ade karim fo e ka karim en fo da karim touré fo kuma en defon ko akonye ko abe wole nyama akonye ko telephone nga fa en ko telephone nyimbula akonye ko ni kusiva kada mi mo bulo janni be funde be diamule don e nyanda mo le consulte saje ko people give you idea yaji ba mo si idea dila be fen kala nyamenna because bari de ka diamu te nyamende bari kunu de ka falen ko kanani molbe jabe social media because problem ko da menna akadante lamo fa wala foltine de banni ko be ni molbe jabe den ko ba promotion la fo mo foy ba adun di moy ka mol jabe de mol people will call you no madam endebe men ambe balo kambe bodo diamol de mo jabe de ka ba bodo be ba mo audio min de ka ba bodo de man jam de ma jam fo ko ah bari in telephone calling ten na fal be ni bari ni nyobi nyojabe nya ngafente social media program ko ni
mon le def audio ki kan donc audio ki ngena ka petol ki ngena ka fokol ki la ani mi ben call la wala be lo nyoka completely de wokay kabin suba telephone be lo nyoka wonyale kabin kunu fana ko nyale telephone ko yesli de
yalo sa ni mano ni ngem dala so da man na fere because nde mbara ko ko sa ni mano ni ni adiam do ni so mandala no kulindile no problem sa en ka that's no problem billahi walla talla zon barka rabanda nga fo en koy ko ndamela ke balde ndere dum dato fo ko kono yo ndero diamu do sa en kay ko do nyin kay ko ko nyin ka bulaje kay ente alpe bare mo fo audio kindene me yalon ko NPP ko le made NPP mo fula fo mo saba iko ha mansanin kala fo le nyin ko do nyin tala mansanin kala fo le nyin ko do nyin tala so koy ko ala mel london wasata rek bari nyin ko do nyin dala so ni nga bondi je alma yakanya sada mun ko fonto billahi wallahi tallahi wallahi take ba wallahi ala ala kira ni la fa wala ko ka fo ni la fa ngaje senati ni la fa ngaje ko mo ya moy ni la fa ngaje senati anta bakala fi social media ya mo le fo la anin kan to men son je anta bakala fo la yaje anta bakala fo la no ke famle wala la ina ko ndiya ma may ko ka be advice non ke ka fa nga fi ko fa ya ko da ndata ni ñow may dum to me nga to la ñinge do MPP ko fo bari nga fi yalla nga fo en ko amanke kenni mo fo de ko ya manke kenni mo fo de bari ko ni seda sun ko ben ko defa am ko be fanam bo to no wado ko so wado ibe ko ke kan jela to seda sun mol ben ko ka ba de daw ko na ya jele ngi am ko be fanam ben jela to nda bar ndete tarno lo programme sifal ko nda nga fo yenne nda nga fo ndete tarno lo programme sifal ko you know
implemented and not backdated. So I think this was a problem for that particular draft. But also, we also have to. So what cabinet has done now is to refine the document after a series of consultation, listening to a lot of stakeholders, refine it, and to ensure that the problematic clauses are rectified, and to ensure that we align the constitution not only with our democratic principles, but also our democratic aspirations as a people. Not for only today's generation, but also for the next generation. Remember, we don't want to change constitutions every 5, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, whenever there's a new president. We want this constitution to stay for the next 200-300 years. Therefore, when we build this constitution, it must take into account not only the aspirations of today's generation, but also the aspirations of future generations.
I understand that the executive had some concerns regarding the 2020 draft constitution. But of course, it was also, even though it had some concerns, perhaps there were also some comments that the executive made to the draft, but it had to go to Parliament, pass the first reading to the second reading. But still, the legislature had the opportunity to do a legislative scrutiny on that document, where at the committee stage, they could have had the chance to maybe adjust on these issues that you have highlighted. At Parliament, both sides of the political divide are there. Why couldn't that happen?
But remember, the threshold is very high when it comes to voting for the repeal of the 1997 Constitution, 75%. They could not get consensus, political consensus in Parliament. That is why it was kicked out. But remember also, there were other opportunities for us to get this draft passed. Now, when there was a stakeholders forum among the political parties, 10 sticking points were identified. All these 10, there was convergence in almost all of them, except one, the retroactive clause. And we went to Abuja. I was there representing the Citizens Alliance Party at that time. We were hosted by Goodluck Jonathan to discuss. Political party heads were there to discuss the constitution. We all agreed on almost the 10 sticking points, except the retroactive clause. And all of us in the room agreed to at least negotiate and accept the retroactive clause to be removed in exchange for us to have a constitution, a kind of a bargain. The UDP was the only party in that room that disagreed. So effectively, the reason why we don't have a constitution today is because of the UDP and its leadership. Because at some point after it was thrown out of Parliament, we agreed on almost all the issues except the UDP. So today, and again, I think that even if it doesn't pass now in Parliament again, it is going to be the same UDP, because they are saying that even if a comma is removed from the CRC draft, they will still vote it out, and that they want the original draft to come back as it is, which is not possible.
Would that not be the fact that either side of the political divide is not willing to compromise if it fails?
No, but the NPP was
case?
willing to compromise in Abuja. They were willing to compromise. They were willing to give and take. All of us were willing to give and take. And the only sticking point was the retroactive clause. Had UDP agreed at that particular meeting, would have passed the constitution after that. But unfortunately, that did not happen.
Okay. Now we move to the next question. The fact that government has announced the regazetting, that is, it just mentioned the phrase, refined the constitution and now published it in the Gazette, meaning it is to be introduced to Parliament some months to come. What process did it take government to arrive at that stage? What did government do in order to arrive at that stage when it had to refine and regazette the constitution?
Well, immediately after the constitution was rejected in Parliament, government gave the Ministry of Justice the go-ahead to start consultations to take it back to Parliament with rectifications, obviously, making sure that the contentious points were there was a convergence of agreement. Series of consultations were done. One was the first phase, two phases particularly. First phase was in December 2021 to 2020, March 2022. This one was sponsored by the UK Foreign and Commonwealth Office. It was chaired by Goodluck Jonathan. Party leaders went to Abuja. We had discussions. Some issues were raised, some contentious issues were raised. There was convergence in some issues. The second phase was sponsored by the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs, headed by Dr. Ebun Chambers. There was a high-level meeting among political parties. Civil society were engaged. So all these consultations revealed some issues that we thought, or that were presented to Cabinet to discuss. Cabinet reviewed the document again, like I said, refined it to ensure that some of the problematic clauses are rectified in accordance with the principles of justice and the principles of the rule of law, and also to ensure that the constitution that we are going to bring is aligned with our democratic principles and our democratic values, but also with the aspirations of today's generation, but also the future generation. So it was a very transparent process. That is why when I see people saying that the process was not transparent and consultative, I wonder what they mean by transparent. Because this was very consultative. There are two series of very comprehensive, rigorous consultative periods. There was also a very transparent process, but also the next process was very transparent. What did the law say? It should be gazetted. It's called public gazette. The Cabinet gazetted it. Now the government has gazetted it for the public to go and scrutinize it. And whenever they see anything that they think is not right or they don't agree with, they can now consult their lawmakers when it goes to Parliament. So this process has taken, so basically there are three stages of the process. One was the consultative period. Two was Cabinet reviewing the document to refine it to ensure it is aligned with democratic principles, but also with aspirations of the government people. The third one is the public gazetting. So the public can now go and see what has been changed and whether they agree with it or not. And if they don't agree with it, they can now engage their lawmakers, because from gazetting it goes to the National Assembly. So National Assembly also will have to sit on the document again. So it's not like it's a final document. I think therefore government should give the document a chance to follow its due course. It is gazetted. Let the public go and engage the document, read it, highlight some issues that they think they agree or disagree with. It goes to Parliament, and Parliament does the job, and it goes for a referendum eventually.
Public opinion, but of course the opinion or the reaction of some political parties, one might say, suggests that they are shocked and surprised with the adjustments the executive has made. Is it not the case that perhaps what came out of the consultations was not reflected in what has been refined?
They were reflected. I mean, Cabinet will not just go and change clauses not based on what has been based on consultations and not based on the public's interest. Cabinet has a role to play, and here Cabinet had the authority and the legitimacy to refine the document, because the Cabinet has executive power. Now, whether Cabinet has the legitimacy or not, people can have the legal question, but what I understand is Cabinet has the legal authority to refine the constitution as it is, because the original draft really wasn't there are some fundamental flaws. It wouldn't make sense to take that original draft back to Parliament again. That will defeat the purpose. So therefore, it was refined, and like I said, in a very transparent, consultative manner, and like I said, to reflect not only the aspirations of the Gambian people today and tomorrow, but also to align with the Gambia's democratic principles and governance system. Like I said, we have a very strong presidential system, and that is very important for people to understand. You cannot have a presidential system and bring a constitution that reflects more like a parliamentary system. It causes a problem along the way, and we have to understand that the constitution has to reflect our governance and our political system. So that is very important for us to take note.
Yeah, to what extent does the executive here, the balancing act has to come in play? The interests of the executive to introduce us into the Third Republic, and also the interests of some other groups that emerged during the consultation process. How do how do you balance this? Because we've heard from one of the main political parties saying if anything is removed from the draft constitution, it has been refined by the executive, then they wouldn't vote for it. To what extent would you, do a balancing act? You want to usher us into the Third Republic with a new constitution, but also maybe to capture, the interests of some other groups and some members of the public.
Yeah, but that is why we gazetted it, for the public to now engage the document and highlight some of the issues that they either agree or disagree with, and engage their parliamentarian. Like it said, it's a process, and the process won't end until after a referendum, sometime next year. So people have to understand that cabinet amendments are not an end in itself. It's not like document now is complete and dusted and has been passed into law.
So it's basically the position of the executive. Now it will be introduced to Parliament,
it is
lawmakers,
gazetted.
And therefore
it is gazetted now for the public to access the document and see the changes that has been done and see the constitution. And now engage their parliamentarians, and it goes to Parliament. And Parliament will also do its bit. Cabinet can further do some amendments as well, depending on how they see things. So obviously, and then it goes to a referendum, and the public will eventually decide. So this process, people have to allow the process to take its course. I think it's unfortunate for a particular political party just to say that if you don't bring the original draft, we'll reject it outright. That is not doing justice to anybody. It's not doing justice to the country, and not doing justice for the constitution, and not doing justice to our endeavor to consolidate our democracy and bring a new constitution. The President, His Excellency Anwar, has promised to bring the constitution back, and he's done that. He's a man who fulfills his promises.
And even set a timeline.
Exactly.
Timeline by December.
Exactly.
Which is
it might be tight.
Very
it might
close.
Be tight. Yes. Because these things you can anticipate, but again, some things are beyond your control. But now, what the government has promised to do, and that while they've done it, they've reviewed it, they've done some few amendments based on consultations prior, including political parties and civil society. They've gazetted it for the public to engage with the document. It goes to Parliament, and now Parliament do their job. When Parliament is done, it's for the public to now decide whether they want that particular constitution in a referendum or not.
One of the things that has raised public eyebrow, some members of the public, of course, and some other political groups, relates to freedom of assembly. Potentially to demonstrate and exercise, as part of their right. When it comes to the arresting, of people, and also arresting and detention of people, the 2020 draft constitution stated 48 hours as a limited number of time that a person could be in detention, without which he or she should be released, or before the expiration of the 48 hours should be brought before the court of law and charged. That has been extended in the revised version of the draft constitution. What is the...
It is not extended, it is just reset. In the 1997 constitution, it is 72 hours. Why change in the first place? Whereas in the 1997 constitution, it is 72 hours. Why change it to 48 hours? I mean, these are operational policing procedures.
Why is that a problem? Why is the 48 hours a problem for the executive?
Because if you engage the police themselves, they are struggling with the 72 hours. So what happens is that you have criminals packed in the street within 48 hours. 48 hours, sometimes it's difficult for you to gather the evidence you need to take someone before a competent judge for them to be remanded. 48 hours can be too small. So why change it to 48 hours in the first place? Initially it was 72 hours, which was even a problem for the police when it comes to operational issues. Why bring it down to 48 hours in the first place? What was the rationale for it? What was the justification to reduce it from 72 hours to 48 hours? As far as I know, as far as my engagement with law enforcement is concerned, the police have been struggling with the 72 hours. It can be too short for you to gather evidence against an alleged criminal or alleged culprit to put them before a court of law for remand. So what happens is that within 48 hours, you don't have enough evidence. You have to release that person back to go back to the society and commit more crime. Therefore, I think that has to be a decision that has to be really revisited. 48 hours is too small. Yeah. So, I mean, why change it in the first place? That should be my question. Why change it in the first place? 72 hours is been working fine.
So one can conclude that the decision of cabinet to revise the 48 to 72 hours in accordance with the draft constitution was informed by maybe, you know, was inspired by what you received as part of the consultation from the security sector.
I'm not speaking for, I will not be justifying for cabinet here. I'm speaking here as what I see things. I mean, some of these are technically legal, and I think the Minister of Justice now is coming with a press conference soon. He'll go into those details. What I'm saying, broadly speaking, at a general level, is that why change it from 70 to 48 hours in the first place? If the 1990 constitution that has been working for many years is 72 hours, and the police are even saying that that's even tight, why bring it to 48 hours, causing more problems?
We move on now because we have more areas to touch on. Viewers, for those of you who are just following us right now, you are watching the Gambia Radio and Television Services, and with me in the studios today is Dr. Ismail Asise, the Minister of Information, and we are discussing the constitutional building process of the country. Some of you are aware that the draft constitution has been regazetted by government, and some months to come will be introduced in Parliament. But of course, when it was regazetted, people have had the access to review the document, but they also have raised some concerns, sparking debate. Now we have the Information Minister to clarify on some of these talking points, so long as the public opinion is concerned. Now we move on. Chapter 5 of the draft constitution, 2020 draft constitution. Here we have two draft constitution here. The draft and the redrafted constitution. Chapter 5, 2020 draft constitution provided guidance on good governance, you know, and good governance defining, you know, the principles of leadership and all of that. But it has been removed. It has been totally deleted from the draft constitution. It's not in the refined one. What led to this decision by cabinet, and how will the principles of good governance be addressed in this new redrafted constitution?
Well, you see, constitution building is a very rare enterprise. The constitution is not supposed to be very detailed, legislatively speaking. The constitution always, anywhere in the world, just lays the framework for government. Now, you don't put issues of integrity in public office in a constitution. There's nowhere in the world, there is no serious constitution in the world, in the biggest democracies, in the most entrenched democracies, that deals with issues of integrity in public office in a constitution.
But good governance is not integrity.
No, this chapter is integrity.
Integrity.
It's integrity in public office. And issues of integrity are subjective. You cannot get any Supreme Court in the world to interpret issues of integrity. These things should be left for subsidiary legislation, let's say in the GOs or in the public service instruments, but not in a constitution. It's going to cause more problems than it's going to solve problems. So therefore, I think that was the part of the reason. Like I said, the Minister of Justice will go into detail as to cabinet's decisions after that. I don't want to preempt it. But broadly speaking, my understanding is that anybody who understands constitution building process, you know that issues of integrity, issues that are subjective in nature, you don't put them in a constitution, but it causes problems. It's very difficult for any Supreme Court to interpret when there's an issue. So for me, I think it was a very wise decision for the government, for the cabinet to remove that entire chapter, because it doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit in a constitution.
Now we move on. We will look at the freedom of assembly, of course, which I hinted earlier on. In the 2020 draft constitution, we've seen that, it said the freedom of assembly shall be exercised subject to the law of the Gambia insofar as that law imposes reasonable restriction on the exercise of the rights and freedoms thereby conferred, which are necessary in a democratic society and are required in the interest of sovereignty and integrity of the Gambia, national security, public order, decency, or morality, or in relation to contempt. This is what the redrafted constitution is saying. Well, when you look at in the CRC draft, it guaranteed, the freedom of movement, but not setting, some kind of limitations. How would you explain this to the public as part of government,
the freedom of movement or assembly?
Freedom of assembly.
Assembly. I mean, obviously, listen, that was another fundamental flaw by you cannot give freedom of assembly unrestricted in a democratic society, which has a fragile democracy. Remember, it's a new democracy, and even in strong entrenched democracies, people still need permit to really assemble, especially to demonstrate. Now, the purpose of the permit is not to restrict people from assembly, it's to protect them. Because obviously, the right you have to protest for a particular cause is the right other group has to counter-protest against a particular cause. And for the police to be able to do an assessment of the security situation at a particular point in time and protect the public's interest in terms of property and persons, the police must be able to get prior notice that a particular group or groups want to do a peaceful protest or want to assemble. So they can do the necessary assessment and give you necessary security you need to protect life and property. So for me, I think, yes, people have a freedom. They have a freedom to assemble, but at the same time, this freedom of assembly must not be curtailed arbitrarily, but must be controlled in a manner to ensure that the public's interest is protected when it comes to life and property. And also, the security and the protection of those who want to assemble is also guaranteed by the police by making sure that necessary deployment is done to protect and so ensure that their safety is guaranteed. So this is normal in a democracy.
But some members of the public, of course, the concern is that the police is part of the executive. Of course, it is out of goodwill to, to seek permit and be offered security. But there are some instances that the police would use that, of course, at the whims and caprices of the executive against the opposition, to exercise their fundamental right to freedom of assembly.
But that thinking goes against what has been obtaining in the past couple of years since President Barrow came to power. This Gambia Police Force has issued more permits to people to protest than Gambia has done since this law was passed. And most of this is given to the opposition. Recently, you saw the opposition came out, they want to protest against corruption, they are given a permit. And they march until to the National Assembly. So, since President Barrow came to power, there has not been such an instance where the police willfully, out of whims and caprices, deprived people the permit, knowing fully well that giving them a permit would not cause any serious breaches of the security. So for that, we don't have an issue with that. The most important thing, the police must be notified of any protest or public assembly which borders on public safety and national security. The police must do an assessment of the situation and ensure two things. One, they provide the necessary deployment to ensure life and property are protected from the general public, people who have nothing to do with the protest, but also those protesting protagonists are also protected and their safety is guaranteed from counter-protesters. So the police should be a big, yes, there's freedom of assembly, but this must also be controlled in a manner which is in line with the public's interest.
We move on. We have a limited time. I'm being signaled right now. Another major concern expressed by some groups of people, but of course who are also part of members of the public, is about the education bit of it. The 2020 draft constitution guaranteed freedom of guaranteed full access to basic and secondary education, free free access to basic and secondary education. Some are surprised that in the drafted constitution that has been now limited to only basic education. Why the change?
Again, like I said, constitutions are supposed to be providing frameworks for governance. There are some rights. If you put them in a constitution, you put yourself in a serious situation. Now, if you know, as a country, as a government, a particular right cannot be guaranteed because of resource constraint, and you put that in a constitution, you open yourself for litigation. Now, if you put in a constitution that higher education should be free in the Gambia, but you don't have the wherewithal to provide that money, how much will it cost to say that secondary education is free? How much will it cost the government? Where will the money come from? And you cannot provide it. You open yourself for litigation. People can take the court. Everyday people are going to take the government to the courts to say that, well, the government is violating the constitution because the constitution promises and guarantees